everyone, welcome. This is Nancy Bouffard, and I'm using Skype for Business for the first time, so bear with me if I'm a little kludgy. Today we're going to work on state time documentation for special ed funds. I'm going to just put a note into the message, ask if you can hear me now. Okay, so I'm getting some yeses, great. So I'm having trouble putting my presentation within the Skype for Business, so I'm going to go over to that window so that I can show you my slides. And the idea today is just to do a general overview. I put this together because someone needed to have this training for the first time, and so I'm inviting everybody else. There's not really anything new here from what's been done in the past, but we are still following these rules for during this year and for next year, for the next 2 years through fiscal year 20. So you will soon see an email address for me. You can send me questions specific for your supervisory union if any come up during the presentation. We're going to monitor the instant messaging, and assuming we have time, we've scheduled an hour, we may glean a question or two to answer from there if it seems it's of general interest. So feel free to put some questions into the instant messaging. I can see that you all seem to be able to locate and use that okay. So again, I'm Nancy Bouffard, and we are recording this meeting. And today we are going to cover just an overview of the way we expect you to be documenting staff time for those staff who are going to be charged to state special education funds. So it's not only how the documentation is put together, but also includes how you calculate from the samples that you take the percent you can charge to those funds for a year. So the documentation is trying to get you to a percentage by taking a sample at 2 or more points during the year. It allows you to do an average at the end of the year. So sometimes the time that people spend doing special ed work is different than budgeted time. So that needs to be trued up based on documentation about what they're actually doing. So there is my phone number and my email address. And all of this information is in State Board Rules 2366, and we're doing K-12 only. I can't see the 2 attachments that I added, but I did add these PowerPoint slides as an attachment. And I also added the guide that I sent over the invitation over email that has all of these rules, so it has more detail about what we're going to talk about. And that I gleaned and sort of rewrote when Nicole, if you remember, Nicole Toussiant was here. I gleaned out of the technical guide. The latest version of that is in November 2014, and we're going to need to redo that for new Act 173 rules. So we won't be rewriting that version of the technical guide, but these rules that you're seeing are consistent with what's in the technical guide. So who needs to document time? It's any staff who will be reported as doing special education work and being charged to state reimbursable funds. So it's for K-12. And we have set out that there are 2 points in time to be documented, and I honestly don't know the history of why these 2 times were documented, why these were chosen. There's a long history of this type of documentation, the way that we do that, well before my time working on this with the agency. So some of you are going to maybe know more than I do about how this came about, but here are the 2-week samples, and that's for people who are doing pretty much the same work all year long. If someone has a radical schedule change and those 2 samples won't be representative of their time, really we need to add in an additional week or more. So that could be something that you check out with me if you have a question. When we monitor, I look at all of this documentation, so I have a little experience seeing the different ways. Everybody has a different way of doing this recording. We don't require you to use any particular forms or agency forms. There is some software and some forms I think that we've given out in the past that many people are using, but a lot of folks have their own methodology. So there's no one way to do this recording, no one prescribed format. So in addition to sampling a week's worth of time and every hour of the workday as to whether or not somebody is doing special education work or not, we also collect a caseload list. This I look at when I monitor, but you also need to keep this documentation on hand during the year, as there may be a separation, and should be a separation, between the person that is doing the work and recording their time on the documentation and maybe somebody in a central office who is calculating the allowable time. So they want to be able to make a determination that as to whether or not a block of time or a certain activity is really special education allowable time. So this documentation, the caseload list, and the IEPs, the service pages of the IEPs, and enough information so we can identify the student, support the schedule or the time study. So we're able to go and look to see whether the caseload list indicated that a person had an IEP or was on a 504 EST plan. So there were some different rules about those two, and the state board rules about allowability for time spent with those students. And we also, when we monitor, look through for a particular activity to see, was that an IEP activity? So as it stands right now, allowable costs pretty much are determined by what's in a student's IEP. There are some extra activities, administrative things, if someone's doing professional development in a contract, we support those, but as a general rule, we're typically allowing, and the intent is to allow activities that are listed in student IEPs. So activities, and sometimes when we are looking at other allowable costs, it'll be books and materials and things like that. But right now we're just talking about time spent by staff. So we've laid out different forms of the documentation. I don't really see a difference between the time schedule and time studies. The time studies, the idea is you maybe are seeing different people at different times during the year, and that your schedule is changes. A schedule may be used, it may be a representative activity over a longer period of time, many weeks. So maybe the way that you document the activity that's happening is more general, because every day you're doing a particular group or a particular class or a particular meeting, and so you can document that a little different. But in general, they look pretty much the same to me when I see them. I don't see a lot of difference, and maybe you have a little more clarity yourself in how you've trained your staff to do it. But they both lay out blocks of time and every day of one whole week, so the beginning of the day to the end of the day, all work time. Ongoing time documentation is for somebody who really has no, maybe like a psychologist or somebody that's seeing somebody during the day, and it needs to be recorded in a way different than the class blocks. I haven't seen a lot of time documentation, and typically it's been with a psychologist or a professional like that who's maybe doing evaluations, and it's just listing out for a whole section of the day that they're doing a particular activity. rather than listing out a lot of different students and a lot of different class changes. So this is a sample of what a schedule or time study, can't really tell from this what it looks like. And in this case, we have some color coding going on. So the yellow might indicate that students, those are IEP services going on, and the blue indicates either a break or general ed. In this case, it's showing general ed time. We've got recess. The white at lunch is non-work time. And being clear about what is work time versus non-work time is important. So sometimes we see people, well, if you look at period 2 to 3, you see there's a 5-minute break. Sometimes people leave gaps in their schedule for passing time. When we do the math, which we're going to look at later, it means there's a smaller number that's in the denominator for work time, and it actually increases the total percentage of time of the numerator. And I'll let you think about what that really means. But the point is we need to be able to see and make sure we carve out non-work time, because we're going to need that for the calculation. And here's a sample caseload list, and it shows students' names and whether a student has an IEP or not. So that helps us when we're looking at a schedule. We're not requiring you to do color coding, but maybe when I do a review, I'll use some sort of a color code. So this will help me quickly identify on a schedule or a time study which students are receiving which types of services. And here's a sample of ongoing time. And you can see it's more like a log of what went on for a particular day. And with ongoing time, you may actually have to create more samples during the year if you have a schedule that varies quite a bit. You may need to maintain ongoing time for every day that you're doing special ed work. So here's mentioned again how we're really looking at IEP services for the most part. And we do have some rules that allow for some meeting time, and some of these details are laid out in the guide that we attached. And when we're doing monitoring, if the documentation, the IEP, the caseload list, doesn't support allowability, then we mark that time as not allowable. And at the end of a monitoring, we do a final report that says for the year, here's the percentage that we calculated at the agency that is allowable for a staff person's time. And so the business manager, whoever's doing the accounting for that, needs to either make corrections to the records or agree with us. Often we're in agreement, but that's what we do. We look at that in detail. So, there's a formula to it. There's a methodology. There's a reason for it. It's not fun. It will be changing under Act 173, but we're still doing this for the next year and into the next year. So now we're going to talk about allowable calculations. So in the rules, we've got allowed time. That's really clear. We've got total work time. And then there are rules that say if you're in a certain position, you could allow or charge to state funds time spent with kids who have 504 plans if that time is 20% or less, or up to 20% of that time, 20% of the allowed time. So first we have to calculate how much is actually clearly special ed allowable time, and then we can calculate another 20% of that. And if you have that much 504 plan time, then we will also add that onto allowed time. And then we've got general ed, so there will be unallowed time, and then non-work time. So out of this, we're able to get the numbers that we need to make a calculation for a particular week. This is just one day, but we have to do it for 5 days in a week and come up with a calculation. The 504 calculation is 20% of the total week, so it doesn't have to be calculated by day. So we do that at the end of the week. So this is a rundown of how we do the calculation. You get total allowed time, potential time. You add the two times together. And what I'm not seeing here is the division. Divide the total allowed minutes by total weekly work minutes. So in number 5, we've got total, so this was based on an earlier sample. We did have total weekly work minutes, so that became our denominator, and the numerator was the total allowed minutes, and the total allowed minutes was the addition of allowed time and allowable 504 EST time. So we did get a question about the 20% pertaining to teachers and not paras, and the way that plays out is if you're a one-to-one para, that's not going to be an allowable time, but if you're an instructional aide, if you're that type of a para, yes, it pertains to you. It pertains to speech language people and to special educators. And that's in the state board rules. So somebody was ahead of us on the slide. There you go. So the 504 and these small group rules pertain to these professionals. And we did have one change from Act 173 this year, and that is the small group rule. You may or may not be familiar with that. It is for a group of 8 or fewer students. If a person is working with that group, and starting this year, if 25% or more of those students have IEPs and the group is what's being taught or what's going on in the group is an IEP service for them, then you're allowed to charge the whole time. The whole time is allowable. So it's sort of a spillover, let's say, of time. In the past, it was you had to be 51% or more. So sometimes when we were monitoring, we split out blocks because we had 4 students in a group and 2 had IEPs and 2 didn't. Now it's a little different because it's 25% or fewer. The language is a little different, and it's a smaller percent. So we have some other things that we look for. We have some guidelines, and these I got from Nicole and from the technical guide, and I don't believe that 20% prep and planning is something that's in state board rules, but it's kind of reasonable if you think about the type of work that people do. So I guess over the years, this is what was arrived at. So if we are monitoring and we see much more prep and planning time on somebody's schedule, we may question it. It doesn't mean it won't be allowable. It means we just have a question and you need to explain why so much time was spent. There is something in the rules that says when a meeting is required of all the staff in the school, then that can be charged to special ed for the special education staff. There's a rule about co-teaching and requiring an approved plan, and some details about that in the guidance. Evaluation time is always allowable. Often I see things that say testing. It really needs to be, evaluation needs to be clearly indicated as evaluation so it's not confused with other types of tests that may be going on. And pre-K time, we don't include that in an allowable K-12 time. So sometimes people are serving early education students as well as serving older students. So here's where the goal is getting to 1% for the year. And I'm going to check and see if we have any questions that we might want to address at this point. Okay, I'm going to go over to the chat box. Find my way over there. And the question is, if one out of a group of 4 students has an IEP and the service is addressing their IEP, then the time is allowable for the special educator. That is right. Right on. That's how it works this year. 25%, a clear 25%. Doesn't have to be more than 25%. So you get a gold star. I don't know how to do a gold star in Skype for Business. And also for instructional aides. Yes, that is true. That small group rule pertains to that. So we went through that pretty quickly. And how is it instructional aid defined? What qualifications? Well, that's not, I don't have, off the top of my head, that's not clear to me. When I look on the type of work that people are doing and I can see that somebody's in a classroom and they're assisting a teacher with a particular academic subject or something that's clearly on students' IEPs, it's clear because they're in a group and they're assisting the group. So that's how I define it. I define it versus a one-to-one aid. Somebody asked about this topic that we're showing today only for this year, and no, it's also for next year. Schedules, this will not change. This is going to change. We're going to have new rules under Act 173 in fiscal year 21. I cannot speak at all to Act 173. Those rules are being written. I know there is an intent to greatly simplify how we do documentation and to bring it in line with how we do IDEA. So we may be looking at ways to document percents of time. It should be much more gross or simplified, but I don't have the rules for it yet, and I don't have the rules for how we are going to say what is clearly special education time. So that's a nice question. We've got about adjusting the first half of the year based on the first time study and adjusting the second half based on the second time study. Really need to make sure you're averaging out for the year because you think about how that time plays out. So it seems from what you're saying that your average would come out to be the same. It would you would have to check it because it would maybe have different numbers of week, or maybe the person works a different daily schedule. Regarding 20% rule applying to PT and OTs, no, my understanding is it does not. That those two professionals are not necessarily allowed special ed time to help with 504 plans. But the speech language pathologists, yes, and special educators. Somebody asked about attachments. There should be attachments showing for you in the PowerPoint. And I can try attaching one more time. I'm recording their addresses. We can send them. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can attach again, but I don't. Down this window. And let's see. File. Nope. I'm clicking on adding attachments. And attaching the PowerPoint slides, but I can't see where they go in this meeting. File is already in the meeting. So according to what I'm doing, it says that you have the attachments. Where do they show up? That is question. I'm looking around in my different buttons to see if I can see the attachment, because I know in some other software, I'm going to try attaching it to the IM. Let's see if that helps. There's a button there for attaching. It says it's already in the meeting. So, you know, according to what I'm seeing, the files are here, but I can't tell you where to get them from. So I'm sorry about that. So yes, we are recording this, and I will work to send them after. I'll send the copy of the PowerPoint. You may already have the other attachment, which is the guide that we wrote. I can see some of you are sending some email addresses. So let's see if there's any other questions. If we don't have other questions, well, you may come up with other questions as you go through the material and you look at how you're doing things in your district or supervisory union. So feel free. I really expect to get some emails after this, because I know it gets confusing when you get to the specifics of a particular person's schedule. I'm going to go see if I can find any other questions. And I do not. So I think we can end this meeting unless somebody objects. Someone gave me a hint. Go to the share button on the bottom and click on the attachments and you will find them. Someone asked, can we use our own forms? Yes, you can. We do not dictate that you use the state forms. People are doing all kinds of different things, using their own software for calculating or their own form for doing the math, for recording the schedules. We have in the past, I believe, sent out some forms to people, and so there are some that the state has given out that are floating around out there, but we don't mandate that you use our documentation forms. So someone said there's a yellow box that opened up under the presentation, had to click open. But again, I will send these out to everybody. Yeah, someone else said able to get the PowerPoint by sharing on the share, clicking on the share button. This is a learning. Thank you all for being patient with my learning. Oh, someone got it. So, okay, any other questions about the rules that we want to have answered here? Otherwise, I'm going to end the slideshow, end the Skype meeting, and we'll have a recording, and hopefully I'll be able to make that available to other people at some point. So thank you all very, very much. This was helpful for me. Goodbye.